La siguiente sesión que vamos a tratar hoy,
The next session today will be dealing with sustainability and how to ensure the inclusion of sustainability elements, starting in the preparation of the projects all the way to the financing of projects. I would like to give the floor to the APP colleague from the IDB, Pablo Pereira dos Santos. Good morning to everyone. It is my pleasure to be here. Thanks to our listeners as well. I am Pablo Pereira dos Santos. I'm a specialist on PPPs at the Inter-American Development Bank. First off, I would like to remind you that we do have simultaneous translation available. At the bottom of your screen, you can find a globe that reads interpretation. If you push it, if you click on it, you can choose the language of your choice. I would like to especially thank our panel participants that took the time to be here with us this morning. I will briefly introduce them. We will start with Elisa Conadi. Elisa Donadi, she is the manager of Realm Consulting Group. She works as an economic financial consultant and a policy consultant for the Americas. She analyzes, she develops PPPs and other types of private participations in infrastructure in different sectors. She's a specialist in the development of complex financial models for the best practices of the industry. And she also conducts financial viability studies for infrastructure projects. We also have with us Carmel Lev.
Good morning, Carmel. We're going to do this in Spanish. I hope I will try to move from one language to the other for your benefit. I hope the translation is working. If you have any issues, please let us know. Carmel se desempeña como consultora
is a strategy consultant for the Global Infrastructure Fund. This is a fund from the World Bank that tries to mobilize private capital and sustainable infrastructure. Carmel supports the implementation of the strategic priorities of the GIF, particularly focusing on climate financing. In the past, she worked for different organizations focused on development, such as the National Democratic Institute, by implementing assistance programs in the Middle East and Northern Africa. She got her master's in business and finance from the University of Georgetown, and she has an undergraduate program of global studies and culture arts from the University of California in Los Angeles. Welcome, Paula Castillo. Also, she is my colleague at the IDB group. She is a strategy officer on infrastructure at IDB Invest. She heads the analytical work to try to find challenges and opportunities for the participation of the private sector in transportation, social infrastructure across Latin America and the Caribbean. In the past, she was a technical advisor to the vice presidency of the knowledge sectors of the Inter-American Development Bank, and she also was a consultant in the transportation division. She worked in the Department of National Planning in Colombia and as a researcher and professor at Los Andes University in Colombia as well. Paula is an economist. She has a master's in management and sustainability from American University in Washington, D.C. And she also has a master's in economics from Los Andes University in Colombia. Also with us, we have the pleasure of having with us Rafael Hers. He's a vice president of financial structuring of the Financiera de Desarrollo Nacional in Colombia. Rafael is an economist from the Libre de Berlin University and the Alemán y Desarrollo Institute. He specialized in international finances from Northern Carolina University in the United States. He started his career in the World Bank, dealing with topics related to infrastructure and public services from the private sector. He has vast experience in the government, in the private sector. Most recently, he was the president of the Anglo Code Mining Company, Ashanti for Colombia, and vice president of operations and sustainability as well. He holds important positions in different meeting boards, and he's a columnist in the International Affairs newspaper. And for those that are listening to us, this session will be organized as the previous. We will begin with Elisa's presentation that will take 15 minutes. And after that, we will start our discussion with Paula, Carmel, and Rafael about the topic sustainability and PPPs. This is a very interesting topic, but also a broad topic. So we will try to discuss all the dimensions, and my role will be to try to connect the dots. I hope that you enjoy our discussion. Elisa, please go ahead. Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you for having me here to be part of this network in the year 2022. It is really my pleasure to support by providing the knowledge that we have, because we've been working also with the climate change direction, and I will share my presentation with you. Basically, we will be talking about access to sustainable financing sources in the PPP project cycle. I would like to start talking about what we mean by climate financing or climate funding. This is one type of local national funding. It can also be transnational to implement adaptation actions to the climate or social actions with financial resources. Excuse me for interrupting. Can you please change the display of your screen? In presentation mode, please.
No, no te preocupes. Claro que sí. Un segundo. Voy a eliminar. Ok, listo. A ver, probemos de nuevo.
Let's try again.
Segundito.
Hold on a second.
A ver. Listo, ahora déjenme compartir. Estamos viendo. ¿Logran ver la presentación?
Can you see my presentation? Yes.
Perfecto.
La están viendo en modo display. Perfecto, listo.
All right,
Bueno,
good.
muchísimas gracias.
Thank you.
Si no queremos llegar al final de la presentación en que no puedan verla bien. Bueno, como les
It was important for you to see my presentation. As I said, today we will be talking about sustainable financing, particularly having to do with sustainable financing for mixed financing or sustainable bonds. These can also be applied, however, also to sustainable other type of sustainable financing. When we speak about sustainable financings, these are green bonds for adaptation and climate mitigation and social bonds. These bonds have as a purpose to improve the conditions of the living conditions of least favored groups. Our team, the PPP community of IDB, we have been developing for the last year guidelines in order to allow access to sustainable financing. As you know, in a PPP project, in the transaction phase or phase 3 that you can see, sustainable financing has a very specific objective. This is adaptation, climate mitigation, and we also have social objectives. So we need to try to set out these objectives, and the objectives need to set up at the beginning of the project. In this framework, we developed a methodology, as you can see on the screen, and later we will have deliverables, and then we will see how stakeholders play a role. We have a list, a controlled list for each and every stage of the project life cycle. We will be developing the methodology today. We won't be talking much about the deliverables, but on this slide, I want to explain what of each stage means. The initial assessment of the project, this is stage 1. We try to help the work teams to understand what the sustainable objectives of the project are and how those objectives may be aligned to the different financing sources that we have in the market, whether they are seeking climate adaptation. We tell them whether this is fitting for that project. So first we need to look at the purpose of the project, the main objectives of the project, and how that is aligned to the sustainable financing offer. As deliverables, we have the conceptual aspect, high-end aids. We know that at this stage, in the second stage, we don't really have much details of the project and also the control list. During the structuring stage, this is important for the life cycle of the project. When we speak about sustainable financing, we need to understand how the financing structure would be. We would need to look at the financing model. Would it be a private, public financing? What type of structure will be used? Also, we need to look at the requirements and the principles that are needed in order to have access to sustainable financing. Also, how financing will affect the financial viability. And also we need to take into account other considerations. All of these considerations, all of these elements can be introduced to the financial feasibility document. And this document is always developed for a PPP project. During the transaction stage, in stage 3, institutional support is very important, as well as communication with bidders. And we need to have clear elements in the contract, what the requirements are. In here, deliverables are very important. We have the financial term document, mixed financing. The conditions need to be favorable for the different bidders. We also need to see how the sustainable requirements will be included in the reference terms. And lastly, in stage 4, this is the contract management, how to set up the KPIs that will support the objectives. Setting up KPIs is something critical in order to apply this financial instrument, because KPIs, not only during the transaction stage, but during the contract management, those KPIs will really reveal whether the objectives have been met or not. And finally, in the last stage, we have the follow-up and monitoring according to the objectives of the instrument. Monitoring and follow-up, all of that needs to be aligned with the KPIs. And finally, we will have a monitoring and control report. Depending on the type of instrument to be used, there are some special requirements depending on the instrument, for that report. Getting into the details in the first stage of pre-feasibility. Here we have some steps that we recommend. First, we need to think about the need of sustainable financing. As I said earlier, sometimes the project has no favorable conditions in the market, or is not feasible to make that project because perhaps this project is not economically feasible, is not an appealing and attractive project. We need to understand what the main conditions are in order to access sustainable financing. All of the objectives need to be aligned, and these are the things that need to be met, like social benefits, access to basic infrastructure, or access to jobs, empowerment, food security, or affordable housing. We also need to understand the size of this financing. Usually, it could be between 5 to 15% of the CapEx, capital expense, and this may vary depending on the size of the project, of course. Also, the allocation of financial risks of this instrument. These may be public, private, or mixed instruments. Even when we talk about purely private financing, we recommend that public will support for the structuring. Also, we need to look at how this will be used in PPP. This can be used to cover for CapEx expenses, but in Latin America, we also have some social bonds. In Colombia, for example, social bonds have been used for the preparation, maintenance of the project. And finally, there needs to be aligned with the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals mix financing, such as sustainable bonds, that need to be aligned with the Millennium Sustainable Development Goals. Now, moving into the financial structuring of the project, one first element we need to consider, as I said at the beginning, is that we need to look at the type of structure. In this case, we have one first choice. This is the International Financing Institution. Will provide this mixed or concession type financing to the PPP. This type of financing, as you can see on the right, is where the concessionaire will have private financing, but also favorable condition financing. And at the end of the day, this makes that the financing will be much more favorable for the concessionaire. We also have this practice where the government is the intermediary and the concessionaire in this type of financing, and the hiring party will be supporting this project. In here, we will see that the government or the hiring party will start gaining more importance in the allocation of the projects, because it acts as the supporting party, the guarantor. But they'll have a third type of structure where the hiring party issues bonds for payment. The hiring party will provide an upfront payment when the project begins, and this will be used for social projects particularly, or for PPPs that rely on availability-based payments. In this case, the government will have access with more affordable financing. And finally, I just wanted to dwell on these because we're talking about the concessionaire for sustainable bonds. We have seen that in recent experiences, these type of sustainable bonds have been supported or bought by IFI. And this is the case of Colombia, where we have had the issuance of several social bonds supported by IFC or by other institutions. So here, the financing risk is present in the concessionaire. However, there are roles and responsibilities for the parties. For the hiring party, they need to include the sustainable objectives during the structuring of the project. They also need to include the sustainable objectives during the transaction stage through the requirements of the bid, and also in the key KPIs, and they need to monitor and to follow up these objectives. They need to look at the type of issuances, and they will need to develop the monitoring report according to the guidelines of the ITMA. ITMA is the International Association of Capital Markets. And although these principles are not compulsory or mandatory for the government or the concessionaire, one good practice is to follow those principles. The issuers of these bonds need to abide by the principles developed by the ITMA. And finally, we have to include monitoring and impact indicators, both for the contracting party and for the financial institution.
The second item in sustainable financing in the structuring stage is to understand what are the requirements that are demanded from each for each of them. So here I would like to share the sustainable bonds principles for the of ICMA. They have 4 principles, which is first, the use of resources. And use of resources has to be aligned for categories regarding mitigation and adaptation if they are green bonds, or if they have to make housing affordable, access to basic infrastructure, if these are social bonds. And the second principle would be the process to assess and select a project. This is where the issuer really determines how the projects fit into sustainable projects category and what is the supplementary information so that they can enter this category. And third item would be fund management. The revenues from the bonds have to be tracked by the issuer, and the proceeds have to be used for sustainable objectives. And finally, this requires monitoring and reporting, which are very particular for ICMA, depending on the type of financial instrument that is used. And then principles and of financial feasibility. We need to calculate what are the savings or the costs of a project that has sustainable funding, because this will have a direct impact on the financial feasibility of the project. So we have to start by pondering the transactional costs. There will be higher transactional costs because we need to have the advisory of climate experts. We have the cost of the issuance of the instruments, plus bond management, monitoring and follow-up, etc. Then we have changes in capital costs. It is possible that some of the projects will have to meet technical specifications in order to be deemed sustainable projects. For example, if we're talking about a climate change adaptation, well, a bridge needs to be higher than usual in order to counteract any risks if the tides go up. And this will have a direct impact in the capital costs of a project, and we need to assess what is the portion of the capital, the portion of a project that will be affected by the climate adaptation. Then we have changes in maintenance and operations. So if we have a very robust project, perhaps there won't be a need to make arrangements or corrections for climate change. But it could be the case that the project from the beginning did not contemplate any climate change adaptations from the beginning, and then this will need adaptation. I'm worried with time, Elisa. We would like to ask you to conclude your presentation in 2 or 3 minutes only. please.
Then
Then we have credit rating and the costs of financing, and also the risk allocation and risk appraisal, because these also affect financial feasibility. Costs and benefits are typical of what we expect of a traditional PPP project. Other considerations are the times for execution and regulation, the times at the jurisdiction where the project is going to be applied, the timing and the calendar for access to the financial instrument, which is to be considered in feasibility, and a market survey to understand what is the market appetite. So when we go into the transaction stage, depending on whether we are talking about mixed financing or sustainable bonds, these requirements need to be included within the terms of reference. And finally, we have that in contract management, we need to report the awards that are made, and we need to also assess the impact. If like a quantitative outcome could be the number of miles or kilometers built, and the impact would be how would it affect the people if there's sustainable transportation, if the community is benefiting from the basic infrastructure, and what is the number of people who have access to this. I would like to close my presentation with this, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you, and I would like to give the floor back to Pablo, please.
Switch to English for a little bit. So to have our guest, Carmel Lev from the GIF. Carmel, what is your take on sustainability and PPPs?
And hello, everyone. Apologies for being one of the few speaking English today, but it's so nice to connect in this forum. So just a little bit of background for those a little perhaps unfamiliar with the Global Infrastructure Facility and kind of where we sit in the sustainable infrastructure ecosystem. We focus primarily on project preparation. So we are housed at the World Bank, but we work with 10 MDB partners, including the Inter-American Development Bank, to which we provide funding to help support the design, structuring, and financing of sustainable infrastructure PPPs in emerging markets. And since our inception back in 2014, we've funded over 130 projects in 60 countries globally. And we have a specific focus on private capital mobilization. So through a portfolio, 16 projects have already achieved financial close, mobilizing about nearly 7 billion in private sector capital. And so from the perspective of where I sit at the GIF, we really see in sustainable infrastructure, there's a real tension between both quantity and quality. So it's well understood that there is a large infrastructure investment gap. Some estimates show around 2.6 trillion annually to achieve the sustainable development goals and kind of work towards a path towards net zero. And we also know that there isn't a shortage of private capital in the market or interest from the private sector to support sustainable infrastructure. So we see that there is a primary issue that stems from pipeline and ensuring that there are bankable projects that have undergone really rigorous technical, environmental, and social impact and due diligence. And that's where facilities like the GIF can play a critical role in helping to support governments in these countries through our MDB partners to undertake that role and help bring these projects to market. So we see that pipeline and this quantity of actual projects is really just one side of the equation. And I think sometimes the message that gets lost there is that's enough. We just need the deal flow. But really there's also the other part, which is quality and ensuring that each project is really structured with sustainability, holistically integrated throughout the project lifecycle. So for us at the GIF, we are aligned very closely, especially as we are a G20 initiative we've undertaken the G20 quality infrastructure investment principles as part of the way that we assess our projects to ensure that sustainability is really seen both from a governed infrastructure governance perspective, from a value for money perspective, understanding both the social dimensions, whether the project is looking to close social disparities, is resilient against future shocks, not just as we've seen brought on by COVID, but also for the future climate-related kind of physical threats. Additionally, we put gender and climate in particular is really central to the GIF mandate. And for projects to be truly sustainable, they need to be both inclusive and forward-looking, ensuring that they are made not just to mitigate against GHG emissions, but are also adaptive to the current climate environment that we're living in. And for us as well, sustainability is also seen through replication, since we are looking to ensure that we're preparing projects that have a prolonged asset cycle, but are also able to be replicated in other markets, not just focusing on these bespoke, often highly complex projects, but to the extent possible, helping to create standardized PPP contracts and frameworks so that we can even start to bundle smaller projects by asset size into larger programs, or help to kind of take lessons learned from infrastructure projects we financed in one market and to create kind of a similar type of program in another. So for example, GIF with the support of the World Bank and IFC is in the process of supporting a municipal public street lighting program in Brazil. It is a program that consists of 15 projects underneath this large program. And through the work that we've done, a lot of it has focused on standardizing the process by which we fund and finance these projects, taking lessons learned, working with the development bank in Brazil, Caixa, and securing good government counterparts to ensure that we can close these projects. About 5 have already achieved financial close, with the others expected to close over the coming year or two. But kind of from that, this is working just in 200 municipalities, but the idea is that this will be further scaled up and trying to transport these programs into other markets. So we see sustainability both from this environmental, social, governance perspective, but also in the ability to create further impact through these programmatic and scalable approaches. And so just in kind of the few minutes that I have, I think that's sort of where the GIF is trying to demonstrate a unique value add in the market, not just helping to increase the pipeline itself, but ensuring that that pipeline is truly sustainable and can kind of withstand future shocks and be kind of better able to achieve the SDGs and this respective NDCs of the markets in which we're serving. And we do also have a series of partnership initiatives as well, and perhaps I can save that for kind of subsequent round of discussion. But we are also saying that a lot of sustainability in infrastructure comes from ensuring that we have strong partnerships in the ecosystem, that we're able to complement the work of other organizations that are similarly looking to fund and finance sustainable infrastructure projects. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to pass it on to Paula. You mentioned partnerships, and all institutions on this panel, they have one way or the other collaborated on this very issue. So I will switch back to Spanish now. Paula, si pudieras por favor contarnos tu experiencia en la región.
Paula, if you can tell us about your experience in the region with sustainable financing, we would very much thank you if you can share your experiences. You've done pretty spectacular things in the region. How are you doing at Fininvestment? She's muted. She's muted. I am very sorry. She is muted. No, she's muted.
No.
Maybe you can tell her to. Oh, now we can hear her.
Ay, Dios. Perfecto. Momento de tensión. Siempre es
There's always
para ponerle entusiasmo a la cosa.
technology related panic
No,
moment in
Pablo,
these
muchas
meetings.
gracias. Y yo
So
quisiera empezar un poco complementando lo
thank
que
you,
mencionó
Pablo. And I
Carmen
would like
y
to
yéndonos a la
supplement what
presentación
Carmel
de
has
Lisa
said
para
and
vincular lo
referring
que hacemos
to
en Bid Invest. Primero,
Elisa's
yo
presentation to
trabajo en
say
el
what we do at
departamento de
Bid
estrategia de Bid
Invest.
Invest. Bid Invest
I
es el
work at the
brazo del
strategy
sector
department in
privado
Bid
del
Invest,
Banco del
which is
Banco Interamericano de
the
Desarrollo.
private
Nosotros
market
proveemos
branch
soluciones
of the
financieras y no
ADB. We
financieras al
provide
sector
financial
privado
and
en
non-financial
apoyo
solutions to the
a
private sector
proyectos
to
de desarrollo
support
con alto impacto,
high
incluyendo
impact development
alianzas
plans,
público-privadas en
including
infraestructura, que
PPPs
es lo que nos compete
for
hoy.
infrastructure, which is
Carmen
our
mencionó
topic today. Carmel
la
referred
necesidad de
to
inversión
the need
a nivel global
for
y en la región.
investment
Y realmente
in the
yo
region,
quisiera, digamos,
and
ponerle un tono de
I would
urgencia a
like
este tema.
to say that this is pretty urgent,
Porque realmente si
because
solo hablamos de clima,
if we only speak of climate,
para el 2050 más de
by
17 millones
2050,
de
more than
personas en la región
17
podrían estar
million people
desplazadas
in our region could
por
be
consecuencia de
displaced
eventos climáticos y pérdidas
as
de
a
alrededor del
consequence of climate
2%
events.
del
And
PIB
we would be
regional
losing
podrían
around
estar siendo
2% of the
sacrificadas por
regional
eventos del cambio
GDP
climático. Esto
to
sin hablar temas de
climate change
género
events.
directos,
Forget
porque
about,
acá se nos va
let
mucho la
alone
hora.
gender and inclusion, because
Por
I would
otra
need like
parte,
2 hours for
tenemos
my
el sector
presentation.
privado,
But
como bien
on the other
lo hemos
hand,
mencionado, realmente
the
viene
private
siendo un
sector
actor
is a
importante
key
en la
player
inversión de
in
infraestructura en la región, con un
infrastructure
aspecto
investments in
incremental, si bien
the region.
vemos
And this
heterogeneidades en los países.
is
Y, por
only
ejemplo, en el
increasing
sector de
while it
energía, el
is
sector
different in
privado
different
ha
countries.
participado con el
In the energy
75% de
sector, for
financiamiento.
example, the
Y
private sector has
vemos que la
financed
transición
75% of the
energética
projects, and we
mundial
see
a la cual
that
aspira la región, el
worldwide
sector privado
energy
va a seguir
transition and
siendo
our aspiration in
instrumental
the region
en
calls for
esas
the private
inversiones.
sector that will
Por otro
be
lado, y vamos
instrumental in those
digamos, ya
investments.
lo que vincula el comentario de Carmel de unos
And
recursos a
referring
nivel
back
global
to what
listos
Carmel says,
para ser desplegados o
there
invertidos en
there
proyectos
are
sostenibles. Realmente,
ready
los
investments to
inversionistas
be made,
institucionales a nivel global están
and institutional
incluyendo de
investors
manera
are
incremental
increasing
criterios de sostenibilidad para sus
sustainability
inversiones.
criteria
¿Sí?
in
Y
their
vemos regulación
investments
desde la
and
Unión
the money that they
Europea
have ready to
hasta
invest. And
países
we
de la
see
región
regulations
donde
from the European Union
dentro de
to
sus regulaciones
countries
y
in
dentro
our
de sus
region
lineamientos de inversión
whose
se incluyen
regulations
temas
and the guidelines for investment
de medio
contemplate
ambiente, de
the
gobernanza y
environment,
sociales,
governance, and
lo cual
social
realmente
impact.
direcciona y
And
condiciona
this is a
dónde van a
way
caer
that
estos
directs
recursos.
and
Y ahí es donde
conditions
la
the
calidad
investments
de los
and where the
proyectos
investments are to be
y
made.
por supuesto la
And this
existencia de un
is
pipeline robusto es
where
absolutamente fundamental.
it is critical
Pero
to have a
para
robust pipeline
absorber
and
esos
projects that have
recursos,
all
pues
these
tenemos
features
diferentes instrumentos y
built
vuelvo entonces
in themselves.
a lo que Elisa estaba
So
presentando, que son
this is
estos
why we
instrumentos
have
de mercados de capital que el
capital
sector
market
privado puede
instruments,
utilizar
which
para apalancar y
Carmel referred
movilizar
to,
esos
that the private
recursos,
sector can use to
digamos, de inversionistas
leverage and
institucionales y
mobilize
además nos ayudan
the
a
resources of institutional
solventar
investors.
las limitaciones
With
que pueden
this,
tener los
we
mercados de
can
crédito local
offset
en el
the
financiamiento
local
PPP.
markets limitations when they are financing
Y en la región vemos
PPPs.
una evolución supremamente interesante que ha venido
In
acompañando además de
our
Binvest,
region, we see a
el
huge
mercado
evolution
de
that has
bonos
been
verdes,
supported by
sociales y
Bid Invest.
sostenibles se
We
ha
have
más
social,
multiplicado
sustainable,
entre
and green bonds
2019 y
market that has
2021.
twofolded
Sin
between
embargo, sí
2019 and
toca,
2021.
digamos, remarcar que
However,
menos de la mitad de
we
los
need
países de la
to
región
highlight that it is
tienen
only
mercados activos
less
de
than
este tipo
half
de
of
bonos.
the
Y
countries in
hay
our
una
region that
alta
are using
heterogeneidad
green
en la
bonds.
naturaleza
And
de
there
los
is
emisores.
a huge
Mientras en
difference in
Chile
the
los emisores
nature
son principalmente
of the
soberanos,
issuers.
tenemos países
In
como
Chile,
Brasil,
we have
donde
sovereign
las
issuers, and in
empresas y el
Brazil,
sector privado
it is the
es
private
supremamente activo en las
sectors that
emisiones en
are
países
more
como Uruguay
active
también.
in issuing green bonds,
También
as
en
it is the
términos de
case
sectores,
with
el foco sigue
Uruguay.
siendo concentrado. En energía
In other
vemos una
regions,
alta
in
concentración
other
hacia
sectors, we
energía, se
also
lleva la gran
see
parte de la torta de las emisiones de estos tipos de bonos
green
verdes,
bonds
sociales y
being issued. It's
sostenibles, igual
energy
que en
that is the
transporte.
main sector issuing green bonds. Transportation would be the other sector issuing green bonds. Currency-wise, we see that there is a significant evolution and local currencies are becoming increasingly attractive, which allows for other players to come into the game. But these instruments that are very attractive have some preemptive conditions to them, which means that they have to have a minimum development requirement of the local capital markets. They need to have an enabling legal framework for these transactions and a minimum level of sophistication of the players. So BidInvest and other multilateral organizations play a key role in supporting the private sector to purchase these bonds, but giving collateral or partial collaterals for those issuances. And as Elisa very clearly put earlier on, we also assist in developing and structuring the bonds, since this will be critical in order to obtain the relevant certifications consistent with international practices. So there is both an urgency and an opportunity, but both the private and the public sector have to work together in order to develop competitive projects for the financial markets throughout the world, so that they can provide certainty for investors. There is a huge potential to support sustainability in the region. Now, Rafael may have something to add to this. Well, Paula, thank you very much for your remarks, and you very well linked to what Carmen said. You spoke about urgency and opportunity. And on the other hand, there is this push and pull between quality and quantity. So we have two institutions, the World Bank and BidInvest, which is regional organization, and delivering you are both committed to delivering bankable projects and sustainable projects. But who deals with this every day? Well, good old Rafael. He needs to put everything together, and he needs to put up with all the pressure of the people of Colombia. Colombia has made huge strides in infrastructure, but much is to be done yet. We need to make it scalable and sustainable. So from your standpoint, Rafael, from the Sociedad Financiera Nacional, what do you say? Well, thank you for giving us the chance to participate in this panel. And after three women who have presented so many interesting things, it is very difficult to add something of value. And I think that we can put together what Elisa presented, and the Financiera de Desarrollo Nacional is a local Colombian development bank that was created to finance infrastructure projects. Our partners, while 70% of our shares are held by the Colombian government, CAF and IPC are our shareholders as well. So we have a working relationship where multilateral organizations also contribute to our bank. And on the other hand, the IDB is an organization that is co-funding the projects through a pre-investment scheme. And I want to focus on what Carmel and Paula and Elisa referred to as preparation, but we call it pre-investment. So in order for projects to be qualitatively and quantitatively financeable or fundable, we need to have a very strong and robust pre-investment process. The problem is not getting the funds, because the funds are there. With the support of Bid Invest, we have been able to get access to the funds, but we need to have good quality projects. And what good quality calls for is for feasibility studies, pre-feasibility studies, good financial structuring, good fiscal sustainability, because we need them to be sustainable financially, but also in terms of a budget, fiscally sustainable. And we need to figure out what will be the type of project that we will go into, if it is a traditional contract, or if it is a PPP, or if it is just a concession. All that has to be considered when pre-structuring the project. So we need to also think how we need to structure our projects if we are going to finance them through bonds or green bonds or sustainable bonds, and we need to consider all that when pre-structuring our projects. And there are two types of projects, like railways, highways, that have to to respond to sustainability requirements now, and other projects that from their very inception have adaptation at their core, or circular economy at their core as well. Respect for biodiversity or for vulnerable ecosystems, which are so important in our region. That is critical. And then we have also the social aspects that are to be built in, which is the number of beneficiaries, the impact in vulnerable populations, and they have to be also gender responsive and gender fair, which is always important in these projects. So we have to respond to all these pressures, and I mean, and I don't mean pressure in the bad sense. We very much welcome these pressures because they are making our infrastructure more positive, because they will allow the growth in our economies, and they also respond to the needs, the social and environmental needs of our countries. So in traditional projects, when we design railway, like cargo railroad between the center of Colombia and the Caribbean coast, we see that we will inevitably affect the people, because they live very close to the railways, and we will need to relocate them. So we need to measure the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, to prove that resettling the people is more convenient, because that will be more beneficial. That is one of the goals that we have traced for ourselves, and globally as well. Then we have, in the metro system, we have to think about how we design the stations so that we give access to women alone at certain times of the day to ensure security and for women and safety for women. And then when we design highways, we need to take into consideration the tracing of the highways, because we need to respond to the challenges of that will come with climate change. So that is for traditional quote unquote projects. And there are some other projects that by definition contribute to those pressures. For example, bringing renewable energies to remote areas that are away from the grid. or where they just don't have access to the grid, and if they or where they use wood, or where they use diesel fuel to create to have access to electricity. So now we need to have renewable energy projects that will bring energy, clean energy, to remote areas to respond to the requirement of using sustainable energy. And this also has to do with improvement in irrigation, because this will allow farmers to become more profitable in the future. So here we can see how social aspects and environmental aspects intersect and come together and become one and the same. So we need to structure the projects in a way that responds to the social and environmental needs. And we are very thankful to be able to count on the IDB group and the World Bank group with their concepts, with their knowledge, and to help us develop projects that respond to the requirements, and so that they can have access to the capital markets. We have put some order to our ideas in the different stages of the projects. In my field of expertise is to prepare the project so that my colleagues who sit in the other side of the hall in the bank will have a better access to capital markets with our social and environmental wise
Thank you,
projects.
Rafael. We have 8 minutes left, and I want it very quickly. This is a complex topic, I know. Thank you for your presentations. But it seems to me that a topic that is behind all of these presentations is complexity, urgency. It is complex and it is urgent. In Lisa's presentation, it was clear the stages, the steps that are needed. And I wanted to make a quick round to ask how to approach that. Me, as a professional in the PPPs, I always face this problem, convincing the customer. It is important to convince the customer because there's a demand, but it is difficult to convince customers because of the investment needed and the payback. Starting with Elisa, 1 minute for each of you. Elisa, how can you talk about the value for that money in such complex topics and sensitive topics? You have really touched upon an excellent point, because the type of comments that we get when we think about sustainability of PPP projects, people say that these are much more expensive, why having them, that we're trying to get away from the urgency. So yes, it is difficult to get the buy-in. We also try to show what is the worth for their money. And also we're talking about sustainable financing. And we tell them that with sustainable financing, they will have better conditions as concessionaires, although the capital costs may be a bit more expensive at the beginning. Also, we show them the cost benefit to make a case for them to realize that it is important to invest in them, the worth for their money. We show it to them by showing them different structures and the economic benefits that we will derive from these elements or from these instruments. We speak to them about the type of financing, the currency. I don't want to really dwell on this, but yes, that's an important topic. This is something we've been addressing. At the beginning, it's not that they reject it, but this is something that customers say, well, this will need much more time, and this, of course, we need to support this by studies. And we need to demonstrate that savings can be accomplished, not just in the social aspects, but also in the financial aspects of the project.
With this tension you mentioned, quantity and quality, and how do you talk about value for money with your clients, given the complexities of preparing sustainable projects?
And thank you so much. And I think what Lisa's point on cost benefit is something that we often talk about with our clients, and where we kind of sit in the GIF is we work equally with our client governments as well as with the private sector, who can come at a later stage. So we really need to learn to kind of speak the language to both. When it comes to the government, I think what's very important for us is ensuring that sustainability as a concept is really, we're meeting them where they're at in terms of the country-specific conditions and some of the context and restraints that they might have at a policy level, and the resources that they might have on their end to integrate sustainability into their project planning and prioritization. So to the extent to which that we can provide tools and resources to facilitate those conversations, we bring in the technical expertise of the GIF, but we also have developed tools and standard contracts and terms of references and kind of a bench of consultants who specialize in these sustainability topics, so that it's integrated in a way that is not an afterthought, and we kind of demonstrate the value of that over time. Kind of the same idea as, yes, the upfront capital costs might be higher, but we've already kind of conducted studies to show that over time this pays out. It makes sense from a kind of sustainability of the asset perspective. And same with the private sector as well. This is where the GIF has played a key role in developing a sustainable infrastructure label, which is something that the GIF will start to make available to our MDB partners and our client governments, essentially easy to use frameworks and tools to show that integrating sustainability across environmental, social, governance, or adaptation and resilience is kind of easy to achieve, and showing exactly how to do it and how to measure it. And so this label is a step in that direction to facilitate both project preparation on the upstream side, but also investment decision-making amongst our private sector partners as they're looking to direct more funding towards these types of projects. So it's kind of helping to cater the message to the right audience.
So we have like 4 minutes left. Paula.
Yo estoy viendo con angustia el reloj, Pablo.
Very worried about the time. Yeah, I know this is not easy task, but please tell us, how do you have to deal with these topics, urgency and the worth for the money? For the private sector, investing in sustainability is something critical in order to mitigate social risks, environmental risks, and financial risks. But beyond risk mitigation, it is also a winning commercial strategy. This is a winning commercial strategy that brings about other benefits, such as higher competitiveness and better prestige. And those things are really valued by the market. And from BidInvest, we can provide solutions and tools, financial and non-financial tools, to support, for example, the sector and to channel their activities according to these objectives. Like, for example, recently we supported issuing the largest social bond in Latin America and the Caribbean. It was an infrastructure bond with the Pasto Rumichaca project. And in this project, what we did was to support the private sector with technical assistance in order to give a framework to this bond that encompasses the activities, the results of the project. And this is something that can be traceable in the market, and we have measurable results over time, consistent with the objectives of this issuance. So this is a winning strategy, but the private sector, it's at different stages stages, and we need to accompany the private sector. That's an
Rafael,
important
Me
action.
parece muy bien lo que
Rafael,
contó Paula, ¿no?
or what Paula
Los
said is
proyectos
right.
sostenibles son
Sustainable
menos
projects
riesgosos porque,
are a bit
pues,
risky
son sostenibles,
because
¿no?
these are sustainable.
Parece
However,
sencillo, pero comunicar
it
eso
seems
a veces es
easy,
más
but
fácil, ¿no?
communicating it
Y
is not
quería
that
cerrar
easy. And I wanted
tus
to wrap up
consideraciones.
with two
¿Cómo lo trata?
considerations. How do you deal with that? Just to add a component from the other perspective, our customers usually is the public sector. The customer to whom we structure these projects to be financed by the private sector is the public sector. And the message is very similar to what Paula said, but a bit different. The complexity is absolutely necessary to address the urgency. It's like telling them, this is something urgent that we need to address regarding climate change or regarding sustainability, environmental sustainability, but also social development. And we need to be aware of that. That's complex, but that's necessary because that's urgent. But also complexity at the end of the day results in two things. In the past, there was no access. This is not just a matter of the cost of money. In the past, we didn't have access to capital because there was no sustainability element. So either we introduce them or we will die. So we need to introduce those elements, but also more and more capital markets in our countries will respond to such complexity, coming up with theme bonds that will develop the capital markets. And this is what we will start to see. And this will bring about growth of the capital market. So in many cases, we need to do it because otherwise we will have no access. And there's also an advantage. We will be developing the capital market that will allow for more access, more sustainable access, and the costs of sale are becoming a bottleneck for PPPs. So the debt costs may be reduced because we have well-structured projects and they meet the quality requirements that Carmen mentioned.
Okay.
All right, Pablo, thank you. Thank you once again for having us here. And because we also have
Bueno,
good
muchas gracias,
gender
Rafael.
representation
Quiero
on
decirte
this
que
panel.
soy un fan de la
I think
FPG.
that your
Me
structure
parece
is
que
very
es una estructura
important.
muy interesante
It
que
could be
debería ser
replicated in other
replicada
countries.
en otros
I
países.
wish luck to
Y
all of you.
mucha suerte
Thank
a
you very
todos,
much
todas.
for
Muchísimas
this
gracias
excellent
por el
panel and this
excelente
excellent
panel y la
discussion.
excelente discusión. Encore.